Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Danes Walker here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Orr, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Round one of your fantasy footy season is done, and maybe for you, you've been reminded once again how much you hate fantasy football, because maybe your captain didn't work out, your premium that was unique failed miserably, you put the wrong cash cows on the field. Maybe you've just had a rubbish first week, or perhaps you're the total opposite. Everything went your way. The good news is, whether you've got a ripping rankings start or things are just gone a little bit, the good news is a season is not defined by 1 week's score. Here at the Coaches Panel, plenty of strategy stuff to get to, and a smaller assembly of the panel. I've just got Rids with me for this episode. Hello, mate. How are you?
Hey, mate, a bit of a one-on-one session, bit of man bonding.
Yeah, it's a little bit of bonding. There's no campfires or marshmallows or trust exercises, but there are some really big questions I want to throw to you that across Supercoach, Dream Team, and AFL Fantasy, it was one of those really interesting weeks, wasn't it, man, where we saw some really popular premiums fire, such as a Cornelio, really come out and smash it. We saw some lowly owned guys across the formats, and I mean under 20% probably, and that some of under 10%, like Taranto and Rory Sloane, and to a lesser extent Top Rockcliffe, deliver massive numbers for us in the midfield. Some of our premium forwards didn't get it done, but some of our premium defenders did. And then we had guys like Oliver, to a lesser extent, well, maybe not a lesser extent, but guys like Zach Merritt. It was a real weird week, I guess is what I'm trying to say, is some teams just flew out of the gate and others, their pre-season form guide looked good, and then it just turned to crap on the weekend for them.
Yeah, it was odd, wasn't it? It was a very, very, very odd week of football. Like, perfect example of that is Melbourne versus Port Adelaide. So if I say to you Melbourne has the best tagger in the league, you'd probably go, yeah, well, that's fair enough with James Harm.
Yeah, it's in the conversation, no doubt.
Yet they didn't seem to want to play him as a tagger. They just let Rockcliffe and Boak go run around, do what they want, and get 80-something possessions between them.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a mad week, wasn't it?
It was bizarre. Even using that game as a perfect contrast point, at quarter time, I thought Port were just about sunk. They were on their knees with how good Melbourne were looking, and then it was almost the equivalent of, all right, like you did at school, everybody changed jumpers, pick different way to go. It was that much of a drastic change. Port were on their knees in that game. And look, full credit to the kids, to Boak, to Rockcliffe, Lysette, and Ryder worked Maxi Gawn over. But it really did sum up the week for some fantasy coaches, is guys that we thought would go big, went nowhere near it. Some guys that we were bullish on, that were uniques, gave us massive ceiling. And getting the right cash cows on the ground is as much luck as anything else.
Yep. So we're always going to have that little bit of a lotto factor when it comes to the cash cows and the rookies early on. So it's always going to be a bit of hit and miss. The RDT, though, like with Real Dream Team's gone to a rolling lockout. So, but, I mean, again, people haven't really adjusted to that thought process. So, I mean, I'll be using the bench loopholes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yet people just seem like, when I was talking to people through the weekend and stuff, they were adamant that they had to have everyone playing. And it's like, well, you don't need to when you've got guys like Hoare and Collins and stuff that are only going to average small. Like, they're not really going to be a fantasy-type player.
Yeah.
Like Burgess is another one. We're expecting 20s and 30s from these guys. So I mean, yeah, it was just an interesting week of football, I reckon.
Yeah, look, there's plenty of questions that have come out from the week at coachespanel.tv. Depending on when you're listening to this, the article could be up where there's a roundtable discussion across members of the Coaches Panel answering some of the big questions. The Coel Kings, our captaincy advice, will be coming through with the past winners of the Nobel Coel, which if you want to join the Coach of the Year groups, all the links are at coachespanel.tv. But I think for me, one of the really big question points that coaches are wrestling with, more so in AFL fantasy than others, but definitely in all formats, is what for you, Rids, I guess, is the difference between a correctional trade, realising and recognising I've made a bad starting squad choice, in contrast to jumping ship and being too reactionary. Talk me through the differences of logic and reasoning to help as a fantasy coach to know, okay, I'm overreacting here off one bad game, or no, the signs are now there. I made a bad call in the preseason. I now need to readjust as early as possible.
Well, so the first sign for me is that you would have been nervous picking them in the first instance.
Okay.
So there might have been a little bit of doubt around it. So let's highlight the obvious guy, Zach Merritt.
Sure.
Week. Okay, and this is what I was saying last week, like in regards to having questions around players and having them answered through the JLT. Okay, So Zach Merritt again looked underdone through that. We knew he was going to be underdone because he was in a moon boot for over a month, just prior to the JLT. So, and then he comes out and he got tagged. So it's almost compounded on top of that.
Yeah.
So, but at the end of the day, let's be really, really honest about it. And I know this may sound hindsight, but it isn't. It's not at all. Like, Essendon were playing GWS in Sydney. So, I mean, that's one of the most restrictive, midfields going around.
Yeah.
So it wasn't as if he was going to go 150 anyway. So I would have been thinking, 100 at best, like this week in round one. And then what happens is the draw comes in and then suddenly he plays St Kilda and so on and so forth. And that's why people were selecting him.
Yes.
He's going to be better for the run. He's going to be okay.
And he's going to get a rocket because there was some certain times across the game he showed no effort when he should have.
Oh, well, it's like 90% of his teammates.
Yeah, absolutely.
But at the end of the day, he was soundly beaten, rightio. So this is a real sticky one, isn't it? So last week at the start of round one, there would have been, what was there? What was Zach Merritt's starting price in an AFL fantasy?
Oh, it was around about, $7.30 or something like that? $7.40?
Let's say $7.30, $7.40. Rockcliffe, okay, who was the obvious reverse guy, was $600.
Yeah.
Okay, so there was about 130, 140,000 difference. Now, a week rolls on, one goes nuts, the other one doesn't. Suddenly there's only 50 grand between them.
Yeah.
So if you were happy to pay that 140,000, whatever, more than the guy last week, then, I mean, if we reverse that, you would be more than happy to pay 40, 50 grand more now this week, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So talk me through that. On that point, and maybe it's an AFL fantasy question, is it to bring it to the point, and I know you're getting to it, is that a correctional trade, Merritt down to Rockcliffe now at this point on in AFL fantasy, or is that jumping ship and being too reactionary because of a 116-point difference in a week?
So the first things first, I don't like the word correctional.
Sure.
What's happened is it's going to remain in your team.
Yes.
And this is one of those pet hates I have, and I've got many.
Yeah, you got about 35. Yep.
People think that if you bring in Rockcliffe this week, okay, that you can then take his season average and that's what he scored for you. No, that's incorrect.
It's from now.
From round 2 to the end of the season.
Correct.
Or to when you decide to trade him out. So it's all about what he scores whilst he's in your team.
Yeah.
It's got nothing to do what he scores outside of that because that's irrelevant now. What's happened is happened. Okay?
Yep.
So I don't like the word correctional because at the end of the day, it doesn't really correct anything.
Yeah, correct. I get what you're saying.
Yeah, so it's more of a fix it. Look, I broke something, I'm going to fix it. But it's not really going to fix the bad score from last week.
Yeah, right.
But what I'm trying to do is say, okay, look, Zach Merritt might start a little bit slow. He's going to drop another 100,000 over the next 3 or 4 weeks. Let's go jump on Rockcliffe, try and ride that up a little bit. And at the right point in time, 3 or 4 weeks' time, go Rockcliffe back to Zach Merritt and bank 150,000 from him. So that's what people will be probably looking at with AFL fantasy. So I understand the logic there. But what I don't think people are quite working out at this point in time is the break-even calculations are totally different there than the other two formats. So we had a quick look ourselves earlier today, looking at who was the guy with the biggest break-even. It was Brodie Grundy and the biggest break-even is not like 200 plus like Supercoach or Dream Team.
Where it compounds over a 2 or 3 week period, yeah.
Yeah, correct. Where it's this week it's 155. Now, any given week where Brodie Grundy has a very good week, he's every chance to get very close.
And I suppose you could say the same for Max Gawn at 150, Jack McRae at 146, Zach Merritt's just at 144, even a Seb Ross at 135, and Clayton Oliver at 143. None of those are you go, okay, yeah, that's a long shot out of their equation of reaching.
So take away round 1, okay? If I said to you Zach Merritt scored 140 versus St Kilda this round 2, you would not be absolutely, draw, drop in the ground, and it's not a gobsmack, is it?
No, it's not. And you look at Jackson McRae, for example. He's coming up against a side that last week Sloane got 144 in the midfield, Matt Crouch got 132, Brad Crouch got 109, and led defender but plays often higher as a midfielder, got a 103 in Dream Team Fantasy. So it's not as if McRae, who probably had a pretty bad game, he was really flat in the last term. You're going, geez, that break even of 144, I might sideways him to Cornelio here. Those are the kind of trades that are just mind-bogglingly dumb in fantasy for me.
Well, same for me, because at the end of the day, okay, McRae's now got Hawthorn this week, and then next week he's got Gold Coast.
Yeah.
So you picked him because of his early draw, not because of his round 1 draw.
Yeah, correct.
And let's not forget, okay, now let's go to Seb Ross as another example, okay? Last week he underperformed. There's no dramas about that. He got 83, 84, whatever. People might have been expected 100, 120 plus, against Gold Coast. Gold Coast were pretty competitive. They were a lot more competitive than what a lot of people thought.
Absolutely.
But this week, they play Essendon. Essendon gave away points to Cornelio and to Taranto.
Hopper, Whitfield, everybody.
Hopper came in with no JLT games and scored 100.
Yeah.
So, we can't be reactive with this, okay? So I understand why people are chasing break-evens and chasing dollars and generation and looking at other options and everything else. But unless you felt terribly sick watching Zach Merritt, and there might be a few people that do.
Sure.
Radio. Sorry. If his performance made you sick, that you couldn't enjoy fantasy and you couldn't enjoy football watching from that point on, and it's only round 1, trade him. No worries about it. Trade him.
Is that? Can you also do that in the reverse, I suppose, to, again, fix it or renovate your side or correctional or whatever kind of language you want to put on the trade? Is there also then the reverse of that, where you realise you looked at players that you missed and you're like, oh, geez, I got it wrong. I should have started with a Grundy, or I should have started with Lloyd, or maybe their scores didn't show it, but I should have started with a Grundy. Is that the same concept and mindset of I've messed up here? Do you then how do you get your way through that when you realised, man, I've missed the guy I should have started with?
If I owned Zach Merritt in AFL Fantasy this week, there is no chance I'm going down.
Right.
I'm going up and getting someone I missed, whether it's a Cornelio, whether it's a McRae, it doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah.
I'm getting someone who I
Trelaw,
think is
Matt
going to be
Crouch.
top couple.
Gotcha.
Rightio. I'm not going down because I'm still points. You've still got to score points.
Yes.
Now, Rockcliffe, Benny and I spoke about this a few weeks ago on a podcast, Radio, and people gave us reasonably decent feedback about it because we were very level-minded about this. So with Rockcliffe, okay, he was priced perfectly for the risk across the format.
100%. And got a reward this week.
No wines early. No wines in round 1.
Yep.
We don't know. All the question marks that came from that, were still sitting there because there was no wines. He looked very good in this last JLT game.
No doubt.
They were playing a reasonably friendly opponent.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Rockcliffe's should have got tagged anyway. It
Over
should have
Boak,
been a Gray or a Boak or
100%.
something like that anyway.
Totally.
But, so Rockcliffe was always going to be an option. But the problem we got now is Wines might come back in round 2.
And it's
How
an
does
unknown.
that work?
We just don't know.
Yeah, exactly. But across all the formats, he's priced for the risk. He's priced at 80.
Totally.
So, but now in AFL Fantasy, he's up another 50,000. Okay, so 650,000. It's starting to get to that point where it's like, does he represent value?
Yes.
With the doubts that we had a week ago.
And if you're on the other side where you kind of have the regret of, I knew I should have started him, is it the same thing of going, and again, maybe it's because you're bullish and you believe in AFL Fantasy. I know we're talking about a lot about AFL Fantasy. I suppose it's more at this point on. It's the only format that's had price changes up until this point. But if you were really keen on Rocky and you just chickened out on that decision for the last minute, is it again okay, your suspicions were right, jump in, or is the, to say the ship has sailed is dangerous for a guy it's only 650,000, but have you missed too much of that opportunity now unless you believe he is a top 8 midfielder?
Unless you've nailed all your rookies, okay, and I'm talking about the key rookies in AFL Fantasy. So just give me 1 second, I'll quickly grab the list.
Oh, I can tell you the top 10, yep.
William Drew.
Yep.
Willem Drew, sorry.
Yeah, so he's
Charlie
negative.
Constable.
Yeah, so negative 20 for Scott, negative 14 for Drew, negative 12 for Constable. Then you're going to continue on, I'm sure. Schultz, negative 12.
Parker.
Negative 11.
That's where I draw the line, is at Parker.
Top 5.
Yeah, so we're looking at the top 5 there. Because if you have a look any further, Will Powell, was 300,000 at -2. Corey Wagner's no guarantee to be selected this week.
Yep.
At -1 break even, and then the next guy's Sam Walsh at 300,000 with a break even of 9.
If you were doing that, I suppose you'd rather do Powell over Walsh, given the better break even.
Well, potentially, yeah, but again, we've spoken about Walsh heaps, and I'm not really going to focus on.
No.
But at that point in time, if I want Rockcliffe in and I own Walsh, I'd be looking at trying to find the money to go Walsh to Rockcliffe rather than Zach Merritt to Rockcliffe.
I get you.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
So that way then I'm still trying to get those guys to score the big points above, but I'm still not missing out on that Rockcliffe ride.
Yes.
So if I've nailed all the rookies, happy days. I know that we haven't, though. Lachlan Schultz was an absolute, came from left field.
For fantasy coaches, they didn't see him coming. And in terms of his ownership numbers, again, this is just purely at time of recording. It may have gone up and down. He's still in less than 5% of AFL fantasy sides.
So he's in the top 4 negative break-evens. They play Gold Coast this week. So that says to me, okay, even if he scores a 50 or a 60, that makes it let's say he scores 50 this week.
Sure.
Okay, we'll be very conservative. That's still 62 points better than his break even.
Yep.
So roughly $500 a pop. Okay. So that's still 30,000 worth of dollars going into his account on his price. Rockcliffe has to go 60 points over his break even, which is 38 to match the same rise.
Yeah.
Okay. And I was conservative with Schultz. If Fremantle come out and dominate, their lowest scorer might be 50.
Yeah. But again, I guess the other variable in that is, while you are talking about cash generation, there's also the points on field is the other variance in there as well.
And that's exactly why I'm saying I wouldn't go someone with a very friendly draw this week down to Rockcliffe. I would be looking at a Sam Walsh or...
You'd be looking somewhere else. So here's
a Zach Butters,
yeah,
maybe a Cousins per se.
Yeah.
Even if you started...
a Sam Collins.
What about Brad Crouch?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who's got a break even of 58, and you're dreading the fact that you chose Brad over Rockcliffe.
Yep.
That makes more sense to me going that way than going someone you thought was going to be a season-long keeper and average 110, 115,000, 110, 115 across the season. Sorry, and getting rid of them after one poor performance.
Yes, I hear what you're saying, and even then, I probably wouldn't do that Brad trade, given that it's 100,000, that you're going to lose off that. But I get what you're talking about in terms of the mindset, the understanding, the reason why you're trading a player in versus the reason why you're trading a player out.
Now, don't forget, this is my first full serious season in AFL fantasy. So there was a time when we first went to 2 trades a week and stuff where I played seriously. That was before Dream Team came back into the picture. I did okay, like when I was focused on that.
Yes.
But this is really the first time I've really been focused on AFL fantasy because I really want to get a good picture of it.
Yeah, no,
I want to give it a bit of a crack.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. No, I understand that. So I guess my question, coming back to all of that, is, again, it's purely for AFL fantasy. I do want to talk Dream Team and Supercoach in a second. So I understand not everyone that listens to the podcast plays AFL fantasy, but I think there's still some learnings for you here as a fantasy coach in Supercoach and Dream Team in terms of understanding the mindset and the philosophy behind the tradings and the chasing of the break even, so to speak. In AFL fantasy, and maybe there's some relevance for coaches next week in Dream Team and Supercoach as well. What's more important in your fix-up trades right now? Is it to get the cash cow that you missed with the great break-even, a la this week in AFL Fantasy, Lachie Schultz? Is it to fix up a bust of a mid-price selection for the sake of a name? I'll just use Pierce Hanley as a name. Yep. Or a failed premium. We've talked about Merritt, but let's use Clayton Oliver in AFL Fantasy for a difference. What is more important for a coach to do? And again, I know there's 30 players, there's different variances, all that. What's the greater priority of trade this week? Fix the premium, get rid of the mid-pricer that did not work as expected, or get the cash cow that you've missed out that's got a ripping break even?
So my suggestion to everyone is you need to look at your team and you need to see what's on your bench in each of the spots.
Right.
Okay, so Pierce Hanley, it frustrated me on the weekend, no end. Watching these guys just bomb the ball long all the time. There was no switches. I'm sitting there watching Hanley by himself, sitting in a back pocket looking for switches. And it's amazing how you pick up on these little things when you own them. Remember a couple of years ago we were talking about Dyson Heppel?
Yeah,
I said he's the worst guy ever to own because he's got blonde dreadlocks.
You notice
you see him around every contest.
Yeah.
And so you go and get the hell in there and get the ball and score me some points. But again, let's be honest about this, okay? So what we need to do is we need to generate the cash and we also need to maintain the scoring.
Right.
Okay, so but we can't kill one for the other. So you've got to be confident with the guy coming in that he's going to outscore the guy you're replacing. Otherwise, it's just not a good trade.
Mm.
Okay? So if you've got 2 trades a week, and I mean, this is often where we fall into a trap, I believe. Okay? So the first trade is used to go get a rookie that we missed. Let's just say people are going to go Noah Bolter to Schultz.
Sure.
I know nothing. Okay? So then they go, oh, well, I've got an extra trade, so I might as well sideways trade a premium to a premium because of the prices and this and that. Why? I don't get it. Like, there was a reason why you didn't start with the other guy in the first instance. So sideways has never been a good idea across any format. And if the price is irrelevant unless you trade them.
Correct.
So if you're bringing someone in because they've got a better break-even or if they've got a lower price or whatever else, if they're not going to score the same amount of points, you're going to have to trade them at some point in time. So I understand maybe a strategy, okay, and I've suggested this myself, a couple of times, Broadbent strategy a couple of years ago and so on and so forth, to trade a guy down to someone with a good draw for a couple of weeks and then bring the other guy back in.
Yes.
So, I understand that, and that might come into it. So I'm happy for people to do that and consider that. But the thing is, you can't be thinking after one game and one poor performance, hey, this guy's no longer a keeper. This guy's no longer a premium. Zach Merritt's not going to average 50, MJ.
No, of course not.
At very worst, in a poor year, he's going to average 100.
Yes.
which means all of his good performances are going to come from now onwards. So to average 100 for the year with a poor game last week, he's got to make up 50 points extra
over 21 games.
21 games.
Yeah.
He's got to score 2150 over the next 21 rounds.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's going to average, 102 for that time.
Mm.
You've already copped the 50. Don't compound the issue by bringing in a guy that you're going to trade in a couple of weeks, and then you're sitting there in 3 weeks' time going, oh, geez, Zach Merritt's gone 120, 110, and 120 since I traded him.
Well, I suppose that's the point, isn't it? You know, we've done the Merritt to Rockcliffe contrast point. I suppose you could say the same for guys that were underperforming in fantasy, like an Oliver, a Dusty Martin, things like that. It's going, well, you started them because you believe they were value points. Whether that was correct or not, time is going to be the ultimate adjudicator of that for you. But don't go and compound that issue, because all of those players are equally as likely to match Rockcliffe's scores from now until either the point in time you trade them or at the end of the season.
Yeah, and the thing is, though, like, and often we do compound those issues. I don't know how many times I've heard people say, oh, my God, he's come good when I traded him. You know? But if he represented value last week and he's dropped in price because you have one bad score, doesn't he represent more value on what you thought he was going to average for the season last week?
Yeah, and the only reason that something's wrong, that you do need to make that correctional trade or that fix-up trade or that renovation trade, is because something has drastically changed that was a variable outside of your control. I guess an example from 12 months ago could have been Taylor Adams in the 2017 season was playing as an inside bull role, but the first couple of rounds of last year, I know he's coming back into the side, potentially in the next couple of weeks. He had a drastic role change where he was barely at the centre bounce, as it'd be the equivalent of coaches that started Josh Dunkley, and he didn't get a centre bounce. It's the drastic role change you didn't predict or couldn't foresee. That's the trade you need to make, not he got tagged, he didn't quite look himself, but I know he's going to be okay.
100% I nailed it, MJ. All this talk about Zach Merritt has blown my mind. In comparison, there's been almost no talk about Dunkley and the fact that he hasn't played any of that midfield role.
Yeah, because he had it for the first two and a half to 3 quarters of the game, but when the game got on the line and Sydney were coming hard, I think he only had, Fantasy Freako tweeted it out, just the 3 centre bounces attended in the final quarter.
Yep. And, he hardly scored in the second half. So again, I know it's not all about that and everything else, but he is a much, much more important fix-it renovation trade than what Zach Merritt or whoever it is. Because, at the moment, okay, he hasn't actually dropped exactly too much.
Mm.
Having said that, though, I'm not suggesting people go out there and trade him.
No.
Because the fact of the matter is, because of the draw coming up, the Bulldogs have got Hawthorn, and News read out the scores that Adelaide scored on them.
Well,
and that was in a win.
That's right.
Hawthorn, you know? And then they've got Gold Coast the week after. So, there's every chance Dunkley may come out and get that midfield role. 1 week is not a failed premium, guys.
Yes. I think that's important.
It really isn't.
No.
It's not. It's just one bad performance.
And especially if the role was virtually where you predicted.
A lot of people finished very high last year with Zach Merritt being knocked out. So, what was that, 7 or something from memory?
It was a sub-25 score in round 1, I remember that.
Yeah, it was something terrible. And then he came back after he...
It was like a month later before he gave you 1 good score. Yeah, it's like a month later.
But then, I'm weirded out because Gus Brayshaw last year didn't even play in round 1 or 2 and then came out and averaged, 65 maybe.
Yeah, he played off the half-back for his first 3 or 4 games, yeah.
Then went into the midfield and absolutely tore it up to the point where 30+% of people across all the formats have started him this year.
Yeah.
And now after 1 game of 100, where it was a poor game for him, he scored 100 though.
In Dream Team Fantasy, yeah.
Yeah, well, he scored 100. Oh, sorry, Dream Team and Fantasy.
Yeah, Supercoach is around about, I think it was 79 or something like that.
They're going to trade him out.
Yeah, no.
So, I don't know. I just think cooler heads have to prevail at some point in time.
Yeah, man, I think you're pretty right.
Again, as I said to you, MJ, watching that player made you absolutely want to vomit and not watch football again for the rest of your life. Trade him because that kills the enjoyment of the game.
But that's
At
different.
the end of the day, it's a game. You've
Yes.
got to enjoy the game.
100%, I agree. But they're different reasons for trading then.
Yes, correct. Or if there was a role change and you just can't see it changing back, or if you want to take a punt. If someone said to me, hey, look, I'm going to go Zach Merritt and I'm going to get Tom Rockcliffe, and then in 3 weeks' time, I'm going to go Tom Rockcliffe back to Zach Merritt and bank $150,000 because I think Rockcliffe will match him over the next 3 weeks. I would say, you know what, back your gut, have a crack.
Yeah, but it's got to be that sort of logic and reasoning, not Merritt got 50, Rocky got 160. I'm going to
go chase.
I'm going to point chase.
And that's the difference between point chasing and so on and so forth. Again, you've banked your 50 points.
Yeah.
You haven't banked the 160 from Rockwood. You haven't banked the Canelio points. You haven't banked the Taranto points, the Dom Sheeds. Why? Okay, let's talk different now. Okay,
Sure.
Let's move on a little bit. Why is there no discussion about Marcus Bontempelli, from what I'm hearing?
What was so fascinating to me about Marcus Bontempelli, and his ownership is so low, is there's only one reason why, and in some reasons it's similar to Isaac Heaney, I suppose is maybe a fair contrast, is we know that he's a fantasy football scoring machine, and probably more so in Supercoach than the other formats. But the thing that's always limited his scoring ceiling was the need for the Western Bulldogs to play him forward, just given their inability to offer damaging options up forward. But I feel like, while it's certainly not, a top 5 damaging forward line right now, the reasons Bontempelli was put forward, I feel like the Bulldogs have addressed. Granted, it's off one game. It's small data sample size.
Yeah, for sure. It's small data size. But the thing is, Marcus Bontempelli, is playing against Hawthorn, and then he's going up and playing against the Gold Coast in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
He's got a break-even of 79, which
fantasy.
isn't great in AFL fantasy,
Yeah.
But the thing is, he scored 128 last week. Like, why are we hyping up one guy or two guys and not a Bontempelli or a Sheed or whoever
Sloan.
else?
Yeah.
Boak,
is another one, absolutely.
So let's be a little bit consistent, because if we're going to suggest going to a Rockcliffe, then any of these guys could be a good point of difference.
Yes, in terms of ownership percentage as well.
Well, Rockcliffe was in 25% of Dream Team last week in round 1. So it's not as if he's a unique selection.
No.
So 1 in 4 teams owned Rockcliffe.
No.
So,
and it's
you're not
25% in
gaining
fantasy
anything.
now, yeah.
Well, you're not gaining anything by jumping on him now.
No.
It doesn't make any sense. So, yeah. So, anyways, I just wanted to ask the question, because there's a lot of guys out there that don't see. Nick Newman was all the buzz on last Thursday, and then suddenly it's like he's disappeared from the conversation.
Yeah.
So, surely he's one that we have to have a look at.
Well,
we were all asking the questions, weren't we, in the pre-season, and we just weren't confident because of that second JLT game.
Yeah.
But he looked brilliant in the first one.
He looked fantastic.
Oh, he's awkwardly priced. What does that mean? He still represents value. So would you rather jump on him now or when he's 100,000 more?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is. So that's why we're asking them.
Yeah, and I like those questions, mate. Let's chat about the Nobel Coel, which is the Coaches Panel Coach of the Year Award at coachespanel.tv. You can go there, check out all the links, and in the groups for Dream Team and Supercoach and the Open League for AFL Fantasy, go and make sure you enter yourself in, and the top 3 scorers for every single format, you'll be allocated votes and points for the top 3 scorers. At the end of the year, it all tallies up in to our Coach of the Year Award. Get in touch with our Facebook page. Wednesday evening is when the Fox is going to be releasing the full top 3 of every single format. But here is what I can tell you right now, is our leader in AFL Fantasy with 3 points. We already have a clear leader too, by the way, Wids, but sitting in second place, tied at 3 points, is D. Davies with his 2,305 score in AFL Fantasy, and his side Spock's Pointy Ears. He's in equal second place. Bailey's 22, JB in Dream Team. Got a monster start there with 2,296 in Real Dream Team. But Mark and the One-Eyed Eagles, he sits on 4 points because he got himself not just the top score in Supercoach for the group with the 2,294, but he also scored a point in another format. If you want to see the rest of the leaderboard, that lands Wednesday night over at the Coaches Panel Facebook page. Make sure if you are playing all the formats, put yourself in all those leagues, in the Open League in AFL Fantasy, all those groups in Dream Team and Supercoach. Pin yourself up against the best of the best. The good news is only a handful of players have got points. It is not too late to take yourself on against the best in the fantasy football community. Let's head on over to Coaches Panel's Patreon. People that are pledging their support to the Coaches Panel. We appreciate your support of the Coaches Panel in 2019. They've flown in a couple of question rids, and I want to throw them over to you. I feel like we've answered a few of the Tom Rockcliffe-based questions, so we will skip over them. But David Grant wants to know, is there a must-have rookie? I believe this is for an AFL Fantasy. And are there ones that I should have to have on my field? Again, we don't know all their players. There's all the variables. Break it into two questions. Who are the must-have rookies this week? Is it just simple the break-even game at this point on?
Yep, those 5 that we mentioned early on are the must-haves.
All right, fair enough. And then the who to field on your ground.
Okay, if you're one of the 80% that own Sam Walsh, you play him in the field.
Of course you do.
It's not a difficult question, so...
Well, I suppose it's guys like, do you put Drew? Is he a must field?
Well, at the moment, he's got the midfield role, so does he keep that midfield role when Wines comes back? I don't know. So wait till teams, if Wines is not playing, definitely put him on the field. And I liked Parker's game last week, so St Kilda's got Essendon this week, so I'd be looking at him as on field. Schultz potentially, if you very need to go that way.
Yep.
Look at the backs. You've got
Dersma, Clark.
Now Jordan Clark is playing Melbourne down in Geelong, so that's going to be a little bit more difficult. Port Adelaide's got who have they got? Sorry,
Port Adelaide this week have Carlton.
So I'd be looking at Dersma on the field in the back line.
Yep.
I think I'd be probably playing Scrimshaw as well.
Yep.
So Hawks have got the Dogs.
Yep.
And he looked actually good in that last quarter compared to the rest of his game.
Yep.
I actually thought he was quite solid across all 4. He just didn't get the ball, that's all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think they're the guys that you need to play on the field this week.
All right, fair enough. Johnny wants to know.
And your guy, Bailey Scott. Oh, my God, what a player.
He's a pretty good guy, isn't he?
Hey, this is why we were saying that for the whole pre-season, we got so much abuse, which is fine. You don't have to agree with us.
That's fine.
But for cash generation's sakes and everything else, like Bailey Scott, like Charlie Constable, we had some really, really good rookies perform for us this week.
Yeah, we certainly did. And even guys like Atkins and Gibbons, while nothing fantastic for them, you'll take that given the basement price we started with.
Oh, most definitely. And I'm not saying Walsh didn't score well. He scored 80-something. He did really well. But what I was saying, for the whole course of the year, he's still going to out-average all of the rookies, I think.
Yeah.
But the thing is, for cash generation's sake, there's 100,000 reasons why the other guys have got to jump on him at the moment.
Yep, no, fair enough too. Johnny in AFL Fantasy wants to know, he's considering doing this trade. He's got a couple of variances here. In AFL Fantasy, Oliver for Taranto/Rockcliffe. I feel like we've talked about that mindset right now. And the other one is Gawn for Wits and bank the cash. Is that a good way of playing AFL Fantasy, or do you feel like that's littered with danger?
Well, I think it's littered with danger because you've gone... If I asked why he selected Oliver and Gawn at the start of round 1 for the season, he would have probably answered he thinks Gawn's going to be in the top 2 rucks for the year.
Yes.
And that Oliver would be in the top 5 mids.
Yes.
So, I don't know, one bad performance doesn't make a season. So, let's just see how they roll next week. And like, you know how much I love Taranto. I think he's an absolute gun.
100%.
So I think he still represents a lot of value.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you feel like you need to get Taranto in, by all means, if that's the only way you can do it, then do it. But I think if that's your main problem, then you're doing pretty well.
Yeah, it's got to be about that prioritisation, as we talked about, is that it's really making sure you get the guys with the right break-evens early on for the cash generation is super critical, because in all formats, you want to get the big guys that are going to score the big points as early as possible in your side. You don't want to be leaving the McRaes, the Lloyds, Dangerfield you should have anyway, the Grundys. You don't want to be waiting till round 17 and 18 to get these guys. You want to get them at the earliest point in the season, especially if you don't have a plan of how you're going to minimise their impact.
And to add on to that, okay, there's going to be a new wave of rookies coming through the forward line, especially over the next few weeks. Like, we know that Corbett started injured.
Yep.
We know that Kavara started injured.
Mm-hmm.
So these guys are going to play football at some stage.
Rankin,
Rankin's another one, although he's more likely to be another couple of months away. But I mean, the point's still there that there are guys that are going to come in and actually play at some point. And whilst we've got Drew there, we've also got the option of bouncing into the midfields and so on and so forth. So yes, it's a real nice position to be in, but we've got to make that money early.
Yes, yeah, that's the key. Nectar wants to know, is it just me or is it totally absurd that over 1,000 people have traded Gawn and 1,200 people have traded out Grundy after round one in Supercoach? I thought trades are at a premium. He's still a newbie at this caper, but it feels crazy to him. He says he loves the show, so thank you, Nectar, for that. But I guess there's two things I've got to that, and I'm curious, Rids, on your reflection. Part of it could be as a variance. People just rage trading, getting them out. They know they've got the reverse trade option. They just want to look and see and feel what life could be like. So that's certainly a variable that's in place of that. I'm not saying that's what these 1,000 people are doing, but it's a variance in the mixture. But I feel like if you're trading Grundy and Gawn in Supercoach, unless it's doing, as you've talked about, quote unquote, pulling a Broadbent, which is going down to a guy, banking the cash, getting a guy with a great fixture, and then switching it over for barely nicks, that'd be the reason. But again, I don't know if I'd be doing that with Grundy or Gawn.
Yeah, so it's all about the points. So I wouldn't be doing it in round one.
No.
The last thing you want is for one of these guys to go big in round two.
And they can.
Or the guy, and then the other thing is the guy that you've got now gets injured.
Yeah.
Like, see, it's a real risky little factor. Like, so I'm in favour of conserving trades as much as you can in the first couple of rounds and then going really hard.
Yes.
Okay, the limited formats.
Get the cash cow right. If you made a cash cow error, fine. If a premium's changed role, fine. But then get really aggressive from like round 5 onwards.
But there are going to be instances, okay, where you're going to need to maximise, maybe pull the trigger this week, so you can use the 2 trades next week.
Yeah.
So there are going to be instances. So the last thing you want is to miss the guy you really, really want, like, because next week you get an injury and you have to go somewhere else.
Yeah, I get you.
Or next week, if Zach Merritt, let's say Dream Team, okay, I'm going to give Zach Merritt or Clayton Oliver an extra game.
Sure.
Because I'm going to back him in, and they go 50 or 60 again, then they're going to have to be looked at trading out because the starting price is where you started at. So that's the difference between AFL Fantasy to this one, is the prices haven't changed yet.
You get another
you can
free
make
look.
That's when it's a correctional trade.
Yeah.
Because you've paid for a guy that's averaged you 60 over 2 weeks.
Yeah. And you
Whereas if he comes out and scores 140 this week, you've paid for a guy that's averaging 100.
Yeah, correct. No, it's a good point. Nathan Ayres wants to know, in Dream Team, and I suppose you could say in AFL Fantasy, what should I do? Is Dusty now just a Supercoach only player? He had 30 touches on the weekend, but no tackles. Is it a hold in those formats, or is he now just Supercoach relevant only?
I think he's super coach relevant only at the moment.
So in Dream Team, would you, hearing what you've said earlier in the podcast, in AFL Fantasy, you'd take him up. You wouldn't go to another mid-pricer. You wouldn't, in your perspective, wouldn't go to a Rockcliffe. You'd bring him up to the McRaes, the Treloars, the Canelios, although I don't like his fixture matchup this week personally, the Matt Crouches. You'd go to the guys that you believe are clear top 8 midfielders.
Well, that's what I would do.
Yes, and that's the caveat of the information there.
But if you want to go down to the Rockcliffes and stuff and then go, say, a Bolter and spend that $30,000 to Schultz, it's like I get that as well.
Yeah.
But again, it's team to team. But for me, okay, I would rather go to the guy I missed. That's the big guy.
Yeah.
So Cornelio, okay, is going to go up a lot over the next couple of weeks. And I missed him in AFL Fantasy because I got too cute.
Yep.
And I'm paying the price now.
Yeah, right. With Cornelio, would you bring him in this week, knowing that matchup against West Coast,
No.
and you wouldn't bring him in this week?
No, and I have the option to bring him in, and I'm not.
You'd rather wait for the week after when he plays Richmond, who generally don't tag?
Well, the same logic applies this week as it did last week.
Yeah.
So, I didn't like his second week matchup in West Coast with no James Kelly. So, Josh Kelly, not James Kelly. Sorry. It's getting late for this old fella. Yeah, so I didn't like the matchup last week when Josh Kelly wasn't named, which is why I went to someone who I thought had a better draw, and it was a mistake.
Yep,
But
fair enough.
I'm not going to compound that mistake because I still think Hutchings is likely to go to Cornelio this week.
Yes, I agree.
So I don't want to go jumping on Cornelio now. Same thing, I don't want to jump on Sheed with no gap in that team
Yeah.
because who does the ball go to?
Yeah.
Is it a Shuey? Is it a Sheed? Now it's become a 50-50 question because some of these guys have gone too well. And we discussed this the other week. You know, if you go too well too early, sometimes that attracts the opposition.
Well, and using last week's matchup, if someone said De Boer's going to tag someone in Essendon's midfield, 9 times out of 10 you're going, well, Dylan Shield is the guy you expect them to go to, but yet they chose to shut down Merritt. If you're tagging West Coast, you're thinking with no Gaff, probably Shuey, maybe Yo, but GWS have shown they're going to go and lock down a guy they think they can impact and limit his ability to get the ball and his ability at the contest, not just minimise an impact.
Correct. And so, especially against his old team, I would have been 100% sure that Shield was getting that tag.
Yeah, me too.
So that's why I would have, that's why I would have probably had in the positives what's starting for Zach Merritt.
Yes.
So, that tag's hard to call, mate.
Yeah, no, tags are difficult.
And I don't use hindsight. People use hindsight all the time.
No, the captain is never going to get used, that's for sure. Last question from Matthew Dennis before we wrap up this podcast episode. I believe it is for an AFL fantasy question. In fact, it is. He's clarified that for us. He says he's wanting to trade Patrick Cripps to Rockcliffe. Cripps will be great, but it's the only way he can do it with Cogs, Treloar, the Crouch brothers, Taranto, with the rest of his midfield. The other trade, this is the trade, I feel like the Cripps to Rocky trade, we've done enough of that. You personally don't like the take a guy you thought was a top 8 to get some cash to jump it, unless you believe you've made a mistake with Cripps and Rockcliffe was the original one. But maybe not spend it. This is the question I want to focus on. So sorry, Matthew, I know that's not helping you. He wants to do Dunkley to Boak. What do you think of that trade, given our conversation about Dunkley earlier? Is that a bit more intriguing to you as an option, especially in contrast to a Cripps to Rocky option?
It's a hard one, isn't it? Because I'm in the same boat. I've got Dunkley, but I got Dunkley for a reason over the first 4 weeks.
Yeah.
So the Western Bulldogs have got such a friendly draw in the next 6 weeks.
I don't know if I could make that trade.
I like Boak.
He's not going to get that amount of freedom again, is he?
I am staggered that Harms. I called this a couple of weeks ago. I am staggered that Harms did not tag Boak. I don't know what's going on with Melbourne. So it's almost impossible. But Carlton, I could probably see why you want to make that trade. But again, I don't know the benefit of your team. If you firmly believe Boak still represents value, Yeah, by all means. I mean, if he's playing midfield this year, he's definitely a 95 guy.
Yeah, he is.
So he'll be in the top 5 forwards for the year, over that format. So I could definitely I could see why. Dunkley's got question marks. Maybe you want to wait for a week or two and see what role Dunkley has, then bring him back in.
Yep.
That makes a lot of sense as well.
He does mention that he has Scott Lysette in the ruck. Is that the better priority for him to be adjusting?
Oh, look, I mean, Lysette, there was a lot of love for Lysette late, wasn't there?
Well, I think it's because we know if he's the primary ruck, which he did not, it ended up being that 50-50 split, rightly or wrongly, the thought process was if Ryder plays predominantly forward and Lysette's allowed to be the predominant ruck, he should present value. Unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, he shared the role predominantly with Ryder. So is that the greater priority for him to fix rather than moving on Cripps, moving on a Dunkley? Is it what can you do to fix up that failed mid-price selection if you've got all the correct cash cows?
Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? Because AFL Fantasy is really, it's a unique beast.
Yes, it is.
So, I mean, and you're living week to week as well. So it's like I can make a judgment call like who I think's going to average the most over the year. And really, AFL Fantasy, it's like you can do whatever you want. You can trade one guy in one week and out the next.
Yeah.
So I would personally probably go Dunkley to Boak.
Sure.
In that over the Cripps to Rockcliffe.
Yes.
I would definitely do that. And then, I don't know about Lysette. Like, I'd be looking at break-evens and stuff. I think maybe an Andrew Phillips did very well.
Yeah.
Who
would have thought?
I don't know. Who knows? Like, it's one of those weird games, isn't it? But Lysette, I think, is one of those ones that you were talking about with Dunkley earlier.
Yes.
Where people thought he was going to maybe ruck 70% of the time, but it was really it was maybe more Ryder than Lysette in the end.
Yeah, no, it certainly seemed to be that case.
So it's a tough one because I don't see why Ryder doesn't ruck.
No, and because he's a very, very good ruckman. Hey, man.
Well, yeah, and you had Westhoff kicking 5 goals, and you had Todd Marshall up there as well. So, I mean, they're pretty decent team, Port Adelaide, on paper.
Yeah, no, they've got some pretty handy tools. There's definitely no question marks about that. Hey, Rids, appreciate your work on this episode of the podcast.
So the one-on-one time's over, MJ?
Yes, mate, it's time to go home. Back to our other halves.
I love this idea. I could just ramble on for an hour and not even blink.
I'm sure the missus would love that, mate. Appreciate your work on this episode.
Cheers, mate.
If you want to go and check out this podcast or any others, you can go back and grab them via Spotify or iTunes. We'd love you to leave a 5-star rating and a review. A massive thanks to the Coaches Panel Patreons who keep their support and also get some exclusive content. A massive thank you to a couple of new premium Patreons in Stephen Summers and Peter Combaris. We appreciate your support and pledging to become a part of the Coaches Panel Patreon. If you want to join the army, you can do that at Coaches Panel by going to coachespanel.tv, or if you want to, you can go direct to patreon.com/coachespanel. Enjoy round 2. Don't forget, for AFL Fantasy coaches, you get what Dream Teamers and Super Coaches get every single week. You get to use the vice captaincy loophole with players playing from Collingwood and from Richmond Thursday night. But any trades you make that involve those teams, they get locked. For Dream Team and Super Coaches, you get yourself another week of rolling lockout, which is fantastic. Enjoy round 2 of AFL footy. And from all of us here at the Coaches Panel, we'll chat to you soon.